All right, familiar face next to me for some of you who do watch the YouTube videos. It's Kellyn Gerenstein, our guy from the NFL Draft Bible at Sports Illustrated. He did some breakdowns with us in the past. If you haven't watched those, there's some good ones on our YouTube. Replacing Jake Hassan today, Kellyn's here with us. We're breaking down what the heck we just saw in the first round. Absolute chaos, in my opinion, with not only players drafted, but players who are currently in the NFL traded with some absurd trades that went on. And we're going to see who is available for the Bears at 39. We're going to react to that first round and see what it means for the Bears. Con, how we doing, and what do you make of the last 3 hours of the NFL draft that we just saw?
Well, we just talked about it, but I'm excited as a Bears fan just because I think there were a lot of guys that were there on the board I thought we're gonna go in that first round. And tomorrow, now I'm looking at it like I think that there's going to be a lot of quality talent that the Bears are going to be able to pick from. Like like I said, we just talked about in our Twitter space. If they want to trade back, they can. If they find a dance partner to do that with them, because I think 30 through 100, like that 35 through 100 area is going to be a lot of talented players. A lot of guys will be able to start. Not a lot of guys maybe who will be amazing contributors for your football team, but some really quality starters. And if Ryan Poles has learned anything from the Chiefs, as we just saw, Ryan Poles, if anything from we just saw with the Chiefs, you're only going to trade up for that quality talent, right? You see a guy, you go get him, but you're not Ryan Pace.
Okay. There you go. The Ryan Pease, man. They get you confused.
Ryan Pace did a little bit too much of that's my guy. I'm going to go get him and would offer a little bit too much. Did it with Trubisky, did it with Anthony Miller. In my opinion, did it with Tevin Jenkins too. He gave up a lot to go get. And I think Tevin Jenkins is going to be a really good tackle for the Bears, but that's a thing that he did. It was a theme. I think the Bears are going to be able to stray away from that now with this new regime because I think that's a lesson they learned in the past. But I think there's a lot of guys that they can get tomorrow night.
So for y'all who do not know, Kellyn Gerenstein is a draft expert. He's got it all. He waits all year for this week because he's done his deep dive on every one of these players. So we're going to test his knowledge here. We're going to look at some of these guys who are available now. Let's first start with the wide receiver group because that is obviously the most notable group and arguably the biggest position of need for the Bears, given the fact that they want to surround Justin Fields with the best pieces possible. Unlike the Green Bay Packers, who are apparently year after year unwilling to do that with both of their picks going defense. Yeah, that is one of the, Kellyn said in our Twitter space, he said it was a good night for Bears fans. So if you hear it from Kellyn, he says it's a good night. But let's talk wide receivers. We had the most amount of wide receivers go in the first 20 picks in NFL history, with 3 of them, Kellyn, being Ohio State Buckeyes at one point in their career, back to back to back. But people got worried when Jahan Dotson got taken at 16 in the Commanders. That's who I mocked to the Bears at 39. But that run on wide receivers ended. There's a lot of guys available, specifically Bears fan favorite George Pickens. Let's take a look at the guys available. Who do you like the most for the Bears, and who do you think is most likely to be available? Will we see another little run of wide receivers before the Bears at 39?
I don't think so, because I think a lot of the guys that you're looking at now, outside of maybe Christian Watson, are guys that have a little bit of questions with them. Skye Moore from Western Michigan is an option. He's going to be there at 39 probably. John Mechie's coming off an injury. Obviously, we've talked about George Pickens. Justin Ross is a guy who I think his talent is worth taking at a position like that, but there's still some red flags, and I think he lost a bit of explosiveness that we saw from that 2018 year. But if we're looking at receiver, we're looking at corner. We're Roger McCreary, Kyler Gordon, Andrew Booth. A lot of these guys fell for one reason or another, but have very, very good tape. Kyler Gordon, the combine really hurt him because everyone thought he was going to test with these insane numbers, and he just didn't. He didn't run a high 40. He didn't have great lateral agility measurements. Roger McCreary has short arms. But when we talk about great tape, go watch Roger McCreary versus Alabama. At the end, they got him a little bit. John Mechie got him. But when you throw the ball as much as Alabama did that game, you're going to get beat. But Roger McCreary, for about 3 quarters, you'll see him do the seatbelts. He had John Mechie and Jameson Williams strapped for that game. Andrew Booth, I don't got to say too much. You can go look at his highlights. That guy's got a ceiling through the roof. And when we talk about these second-round guys, we love to talk about a ceiling, right? Because these are the guys that are falling because of one reason or another. David Ojabo is another guy. Not saying the Bears need an edge rusher, but we're talking about moving Robert Quinn. Robert Quinn's getting a little old. He probably peaked, right? I don't know if he's going to have another season like he just did. He's probably going to be productive.
Oh, he peaked for sure.
Yeah, but he's not going to have another one like he just did. Travis Gibson, I think, is a fine option at the other end. But I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that the Bears could look at. We're talking safety with Jaquan Brisker, Jalen Petrie. We're looking at that. I mean, offensive line, there's not as much. Bernard Raymond, maybe from Central Michigan, offensive tackle. Depends on how the Bears feel about Larry Borom, in my opinion. If they like Larry Borom as going forward as their tackle, they probably don't draft a tackle in the second round. Stay away from Raymond. But I'm really excited just because I think that they can't mess this up. And we all know if you watch me on this show or you've heard me on Bears Nation, you know I'm not a big fan of the Cole Kmet pick. I think Cole is an okay tight end. I just don't think that picking him at 43 in 2020 was a great idea. But here, 39, 48, I think that it's very hard to mess it up as bad as they did back then.
What you're kind of hinting at, Kellyn, is the fact that the Bears might have to or might be forced, based off of what happened in the first round, forced to take sort of a best player available approach. Because given, what we saw and the players that have fallen, I mean, not only has it been Andrew Booth and David Ajabo, Nakobe Dean fell to the first round, which many people thought, would not happen. And if Nakobe Dean falls to at 39, are you going to say no to the, the guy who won the Dick Butkus linebacker award this year for best linebacker in the country? Somebody's going to want that guy. And then you look at the other, sort of players who are still available. You talked about Boy Mafi, another edge rusher from Minnesota. Perion Winfrey from Oklahoma is a defensive tackle who's really talented. Would you be surprised? I mean, we've been thinking all along throughout this process for the Bears. It's cornerback or it's maybe an offensive lineman who falls to at the right spot. We know that depth kind of gets strange there in the second round when it comes to offensive line, specifically guard. But it was either cornerback or wide receiver. At this point, you don't want to reach for a certain guy because Ryan Poles said he was not going to do that. If a best player available type situation presents yourself at 39 and it is a defensive guy, maybe at a position that's not cornerback, how do the Bears look at that and say, hey, we cannot pass up David Ajabo. We cannot pass up Nakobe Dean if he falls or a guy who isn't a cornerback, or do you have to go position of need? Because that is the age-old question. And given the holes on the Bears roster, it's a hard one.
Yeah, I don't agree reaching for need at any point in the draft. So, but that does take into account now if a guy like Nakobe Dean is the best player available at 39, I think that's a trade back spot. I think you'll love that because someone's got to want that guy. I think he's the best linebacker in the draft. And again, it's a good night for Bears fans. I like Quay Walker. I think Quay Walker was a day two linebacker, a very, very athletic guy. He wasn't the best linebacker on Georgia. Nakobe Dean was, in my opinion. So them taking him, the Green Bay Packers took two players from Georgia, and both of those players were not the best player in their unit. Devontae Wyatt was not better than Jordan Davis. Quay Walker was not better than Nakobe Dean. Some people will make the argument he wasn't better than Channing Tindall either. So the Packers, in my opinion, didn't have a good night. Arnold Ebiketie, Boye Mafe at edge. We can take a safety. We can take a corner. I'd probably lay off a linebacker. I even think if we go IDL, that's fine. Perion Winfrey, Travis Jones, those guys, I'm okay with that. I think it might be a bit soon for either of them, but I mean, the Bears, you saw how big it is for their defense to have dominant interior presences. And all those guys are gone. Bilal Nichols is gone. Eddie Goldman is gone. Akeem Hicks might be gone. Yeah, but I mean, all those guys are gone. That core of the defense, Khalil Mack obviously is gone. So, it's tough. They're rebuilding from the bottom, and it's going to be frustrating for Bears fans because you're probably going to see teams like the Jets, the Jaguars, take that next step. The guys who were in the same position we were last year, but they're not restarting like we are. Jags got a new coach, yes, but they had a ton of cap space. The Jets are establishing themselves. Joe Douglas has been there a couple of years now. Robert Saleh is going to year 2. The Bears are not where those teams were, so do not, Bears fans, it's going to be rough this year. It's going to be rough. But next year, I think it'll be the really big year we take the step, especially in free agency. But tomorrow night, I think, could be a really good big piece too.
Yeah, I mean, you build through the draft. I know the Rams and the Chargers, some of these other teams nowadays are saying, no, you don't. You win by spending a shit ton of money on free agency players. And, the Bears will be in a position to do that next year. But it does start with the draft and the foundation that begins tomorrow. And it's funny, Kellyn, after watching 3 hours of the draft, I just feel like the ESPN draft music is playing behind me that like I feel like I'm Mel Kiper here spitting the analysis. Maybe I'll throw it in as an edit there in the podcast. But let's go back to wide receiver because we talked a little bit about George Pickens on the Twitter space. Let's get back to him because that is the number one name that Bears fans are looking at, and he has fallen out of the first round. People thought maybe the Packers would take him there at the end. Maybe somewhat. Yeah, I did as well. I mean, we all did. Everyone thought the Packers were going to take a wide receiver. They didn't. That wide receiver wasn't George Pickens. People also thought Skye Moore in a lot of mock drafts was rising into the first round. And then, we've talking about Justin Ross before and Calvin Austin, and it's not, to me, unreasonable to assume that those guys who were previously projected to be third-round picks, Justin Ross maybe in a fourth-round pick, depending on how much teams panic about his injury history. Calvin Austin could be a second-rounder. He could be a guy you take at 48 if teams say, boom, Tolbert goes early. Boom, Christian Watson goes early. Pickens. But of those three guys, like, to me, Pickens, Tolbert, Watson, they're the top three remaining right now, in my opinion. And those guys could go any which way. Who would you like the most out of those three? I think it's Pickens for you. But assuming, let's say Pickens goes before 39 and you're left with Watson, Tolbert, Skye Moore, some of the other guys, do you pass on it? Do you take one of those guys if they're available? How much do you love those guys? And who do you think the Bears would take if they're available?
I'm okay with taking Christian Watson there.
Okay.
Because I
talk
think
about raw, man. Talk about raw.
Yeah. I'm okay with that just because I guess we're talking tools, right? We're talking ceiling. He's not a guy who I dove deep into like I did George Pickens or like Justin Ross, so I couldn't speak too much on him. But just from dabbling in his tape, a similar player to George Pickens, right? A guy who is not the greatest route runner, but moves really well. Tall guy, flexible, solid hands. I think he's worth a round 2 pick. I think he's worth a pick right there. And, we're not talking about a guy who has like this low floor, right? Or we're talking about a guy who has established himself at the FCS level, a guy who is going to be able to get open, and Darnell Mooney is going to step into a role that he's never been in before, which is being the number one receiver on the team, and everyone knows that, right? I think a guy like Christian Watson can take a little bit of pressure off of that, do a little bit of things in the backfield, in and out of the backfield with motion, splitting out to the slot, splitting out to Z to X, all of that. I think he can do everything. It's just going to take some time to really get comfortable with all that and be able to beat NFL press guys who can really get your hands on you and make you feel it. He didn't see that at the FCS level, a guy who can get in his face and make his presence felt. But if you're betting on your coaching, right? Brian Poles, Matt Eberflus, they brought in their staff, they brought in their guys. You have to trust those guys, and you have to trust that your board. You have to trust your coaches, and you got to trust the guys that you drafted. And God bless. Let's hope that they do that tomorrow night.
Absolutely, and that's something you couldn't trust in the previous regime. I mean, you had zero trust that Matt Nagy and co were going to develop any of those players. Let's have a little fun, and let's just play it out. Let's see who you have the Bears taking. I'm putting you on the clock at 39. Obviously, we don't know who's going to get taken before that, but with the guys that we have available, let's throw out the names for the listeners there. Again, it's David Ojabo available, Andrew Booth, Nakobe Dean, Arnold Ibikite from Penn State. Malik Willis is available. I think someone's going to take him.
Someone's going to take him. I think Minnesota might get him at 34.
You think Minnesota might get him?
I think I would.
They seem awfully committed to Kirk.
Take him at 32. I really thought they were.
Really? Even with Kellen Mond in their back pocket as well?
Yes, I think Malik Willis is better than Kellen Mond. Now,
well, I would agree, but
that's all on them, right? That's a Vikings philosophy. That's whatever philosophy is in their building. That's how they're going to feel. If they think Kellen Mond is the guy down the road, that's fine. But that's on them. Now, that's fine if he doesn't go, because that means that the Vikings, I'm not scared of them. Now, if Malik Willis develops into the guy I think he can be, I think that's a dangerous guy to have in your division. Kellen Mond, I really don't care. That guy can be whatever the hell he wants to be. I'm not scared. He had great first name, but especially for a quarterback, but just, not a guy I really respect his ceiling per se. But let's say a perfect world, right, Kevin? Let's say a perfect world. 39 for me in a perfect world is Andrew Booth, and 48 is George Pickens. That's a perfect world for me.
Wow.
Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. But Kyler Gordon is fine at 39. I would love Kyler Gordon at 39. Andrew Booth to me is a top 10 player in the class, but he fell because of medicals. So I don't think they can mess this up. Ebiketie and Mafe are two guys that I wouldn't say they're first round talents, but guys that I would have no problem taking at the front end of this round. We talked about the defensive line. Travis Jones could be an impact player up on the front. Skye Moore I wouldn't put Skye Moore in the George Pickens and Christian Watson.
I'm trying to stay away from him if I'm being honest.
But, yeah, I'm not the biggest Skye Moore guy. Calvin Austin, I'd say Calvin Austin's more of a third round guy just because the size. And Justin Fields is a guy that you can afford to pair him with, because Justin Fields' main thing is his accuracy, right? And a guy and Calvin Austin's going to be a guy who can extend plays, because you're not going to be able to stick with him for 4 or 5 seconds. So a guy like Justin Fields, who likes to extend the play, is going to mesh well with that. But I think he's more of a guy that you're going to want to aim for in the third round. But that's a perfect world for me. Now, let's say both those guys are gone by 39. Let's say all three, Kyler Gordon, George Pickens, and Andrew Booth are all gone. Then what's a perfect world look like? You kind of got to get creative from there. I'll ask you then. What's 39 and 48? Those three guys are gone. What's it look like for you?
It looks like Jalen Petrie for me. I mean, it looks exactly like that. Why do I keep forgetting his name? Kenny, who is it from Kenny Moore from the Colts? I think Jalen Petrie could be exactly what Kenny Moore was for Matt Eberflus in the Colts defense. I made that comparison in the past. And I mean, he's listed as a safety, but he has the ability to play cornerback as well. He's super aggressive. To me, that is perfect. And I could see Matt Eberflus being in the room with Ryan Poles saying, hey, we can't pass up Jalen Petrie here. At 39, he's too good, and he's a perfect fit for my defense, and that he would be. So that's a perfect world for me is Jalen Petrie. And then honestly, the perfect world for me once you get to 48 is moving down. I mean, I don't think you're at a position unless things shake out well enough for you where you're really gonna at that point see a wide receiver that you really need. I mean, I don't know what their evaluations are on some of those guys who are going to be available there, whether that be a John Mechie, who I'm not in love with, who I would like in the third round, but not in the second, or Alec Pierce.
Over John Mechie.
Me as well. I would take Calvin Austin over John Mechie, quite frankly. I'm not high on, we've already talked about Skye Moore, not high on him. I'm not as high on Alec Pierce as I am about Pickens, Austin, or Ross. So the ideal situation for me is you get Petrie at 39, or you get yourself a talented cornerback, whoever it may be that falls, whether that be McCreary, whether that be Gordon. And then at 49, you move down and you put yourself in a position where you don't have to worry about reaching for a position of need, because your first two picks, one of them has to be wide receiver. However, whichever way it shakes out, to me, one of them has to be receiver. Move down, put yourself in a good position to draft a guy who's supposed to be where they're supposed to be late in the second, early in the third, pick up another third round pick or a fourth round pick, use that on Justin Ross, and take Calvin Austin with that pick that you use to move down. That's my perfect scenario. Again, I mean, we just don't know. I'm worried that there's going to be a run on wide receivers and everything's going to get shifted up. Like all of a sudden, Calvin Austin's going to turn into a second rounder. Justin Ross is going to turn into a third rounder, early third rounder. But you just never know. I mean, that's the crazy thing about the draft. The crazy thing about tonight, I mean, you saw guys go in the first round you didn't expect. Cole Strange went to the Patriots at 29. Typical Patriots move. But that's ideal for me. I think they have to trade down in this round and acquire more picks, simply because right now they only have 6 and they have 21 roster spots to fill. You're not signing 15 undrafted free agents. I mean, you could, but they got to find some more players. And I think trading down is the best way to do that, especially, Kellyn, think about this. I mean, you're the big quarterback guy. Let's talk about some of the quarterbacks that are still available, that being Malik Willis and Desmond Ridder. And whether people are high enough on Matt Corral or Sam Howell to move up. And I think teams will be. I mean, I think there will be teams that will take maybe 2 of those guys, maybe Ridder and Willis, before 39. And if the Bears get lucky enough to where a team comes at them saying, hey, we really want a quarterback here and we'll trade a lot because it's a quarterback. This could be our franchise guy. We want to trade assets for him. And the Bears take advantage and use that as leverage. I think they could get a team coming up to them and saying, hey, we want your pick. And they could acquire more and fleece another team in a trade for a quarterback. But what do you think happens with the quarterbacks and how does that affect the Bears?
I think you got to make them feel desperate. We will have a lot of cap space next season. You're right. I think you got to make them feel desperate, right? Leverage a bad quarterback class as much as you can. And so if a team does need a quarterback in this class, they're really, really desperate. So that you can use to your advantage too. I'm not a big Desmond Ridder guy. The only guy in this class that I think will be a starter in 5 years if he hits a ceiling is Malik Willis. I think Mitchell Trubisky is going to beat Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh at their quarterback competition the next 2 years. I don't think that. I mean, I think a lot of people. I don't know why anyone would disagree with that, but I think there's just going to be a lot of teams that are going to feel needy, and that's where the magic of a front office comes in. And if they don't acquire a lot, that's fine. Just say they're at 48 and a team is like, I want Sam Howell, let's go get him. Say it's Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh.
Oh, Pittsburgh again.
Carolina. Say it's Carolina. That would be funny if it was Pittsburgh again. Say it's Carolina. They want to come up. They're like, hey, we want Sam Howell at 48. All right, give me a couple more picks. I think Carolina's picking before us in the second. But regardless, another team coming up. I don't know the exact amount of where everyone's picking in the second round. Say when someone comes up, you get another second and another third, or you get their second and another third, right? So now you got your
Yeah.
2 seconds and another third. There's like we just talked about. There's a lot of talent that's going to be there from 35 to 100 guys that are going to start in the NFL for a good amount of time. So you're right. I mean, acquire as much talent as you can. This is not going to be a year where you're going to win a lot of games. Don't trade up. Chris Olave's not there. Garrett Wilson's not there. Jameson Williams isn't there. There's not a lot of guys that you're going to be able to trade up for. So there you go.
Yeah. So that's how it goes. Round 2, 33, Jacksonville, then Detroit, then the Jets, then the Giants. So it's when you look at these, you have to also consider the players that these teams have already taken, right? So the Jets aren't taking a wide receiver, in my opinion. You get Garrett Wilson. The Jets had a great draft, by the way. Really, really good draft, in my opinion, from the Jets. Giants probably will go wide receiver, but I see some of those teams like the Atlanta Falcons. Do they want to jump up to 39 if one of those quarterbacks fall? I mean, are you content with Marcus Mariota for a whole year without a young quarterback to develop under him? I'm not sure. I see them at 43 potentially moving up. You get their 43 and they say, hey, we're desperate. We'll give you a third rounder as well. Is that not a win? Seems like a win to me.
It's a win.
And there's a few other teams like that. I mean, Washington. No, they have. How high are they on Carson? It's just, when you get into the second round, you'll see teams that don't need a quarterback now just going after a quarterback for a guy that they can maybe have as a backup or who can be a starter in 2-3 years. Anything can happen. So, before we let you get out of here, let's you said who you might like at 39. Give us the crystal ball. Who are they taking at 39? If they don't move down, crystal ball. If you get it right, I'll buy you a Subway sandwich or something.
Okay. Crystal ball, 39, Chicago Bears. I'm gonna say George Pickens. I'm gonna just say
okay.
Say George Pickens. Like I said, I don't think he's going too early. I do think NFL teams are very worried about the maturity stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think Christian Watson goes before him. Let's say Houston takes Christian Watson at 37, because I don't think the Jags are going receiver because they've dumped a lot of money in there. The Lions already traded up for a receiver. The Jets went for receiver. The Giants, if they haven't, they're still got Kadarius Toney in their back pocket. They got Kenny Galladay. I don't know if that's a spot where they're going receiver. Hopefully they don't, right? Texans say 37, they go Christian Watson. 38, again, the Jets. I think that 38 spot is a spot that the Falcons might want to trade into. Hopefully they don't, because they'll trade into 39 with the Bears. And if they want to, that's fine. I'm fine with that. But I think Pickens can fall to 39, and then you might fall to 48. One of the two. Will you buy me a half Subway sandwich if we get him at 48?
I'll still buy you a full one, just for guessing it right. But I don't think there's any way. I mean, you think he's falling all the way to 48? To me, that's outrageous. I mean, I
agree. I think physical wise, I thought he was a first round corner, but there's some. I wouldn't say like people I trust. There's not a lot of guys that I know that are involved in NFL circles. But there's a lot of people that are saying like, oh, the NFL is worried about George Pickens' maturity issues, whatever the hell that may mean, whether it's he just didn't interview well or they talked to guys at Georgia and were like, hey, this kid is just young. I can't 100% vouch for him yet. Or, maybe it's just the stuff they saw on the field, spraying guys with water bottles on the sideline. He just showed he was a young kid. But that's sometimes what you get. And I think that you live with that with a 20-year-old like George Pickens versus drafting 24-year-old Anthony Miller, a guy who Anthony Miller I wouldn't say he had like issues like that, like personal fouls, but Anthony Miller was a hothead. Anthony Miller was a little overly competitive, and everyone, again, if you've seen me on this podcast, you follow me on Twitter, you know how I feel about Anthony Miller. That's my guy, but his problems were very, very evident. It's the reason why he kind of fizzled out so far. So I think Pickens as a 20-year-old, you live with that and you trust that you can develop him as a young man, hopefully.
It reminds me of last year. I take these things with a grain of salt after last year when there was questions about Justin Fields' work ethic. And of course, we knew that, being a part of the OSU circle, we knew that was ridiculous. And, we're not part of the Georgia circle. And I'm sure there's guys over there who would say, things that people are saying about George Pickens are ridiculous. So, I always take those things with a grain of salt. And, it's just you'll never know. But my crystal ball, I'm going Jalen Petrie. I am. I think there's going to be teams that trade up for a wide receiver. I think someone's going to get really, really happy that Christian Watson is available. But don't get me wrong, there will be one of the top, 3 wide receivers. Let's say 4: Pickens, Skye Moore, Watson, and Tolbert. We'll say those guys are in tier 1 of the remaining wide receivers. One of them will be available for the Bears at 39. I'm not in love with any of them enough to take him there at 39. I think you can get a really, really good player. You think about what the Bears were able to get in the second round a few years ago with Jalen Johnson. I think you can get something similar with Jalen Petrie at 39, and then I do like to trade down at 48. And who knows? Ryan Poles might blow us away. He'll trade up into 33. He'll take, whoever. I don't know. I mean, I would put the odds of them trading up at 0, but we've been waiting for aggression out of Ryan Poles, and people thought that the dream would happen tonight, that Chris Olave would fall far enough for the Bears to make a move. And there's always the Twitter heads right now who are saying, where are the Bears? What are they doing? Guys, come on. What do you want them to do?
Listen, Christmas Day already came for the Bears. It was this day last year at pick number 11 when we announced that Justin Fields was headed to Chicago. I still don't know how that happened, man. I still don't know how we got him. I have no idea. It still feels like a miracle.
It's a miracle. And that was our first round pick this year. You walked away with Justin Fields this year in the first round, Bears fans, in 2022. I am perfectly fine with that. But Kellyn's going George Pickens at 39, much to the favor of many Bears fans who want to see Pickens as a Bear. And I'm going Jalen Petrie, and we'll see tomorrow in the second round. It starts at 7 o'clock. Kellyn, we're doing a draft show tomorrow night starting at 7. So we'll have you if you're free. Come on, we're gonna have a whole bunch of panelists on here. We're gonna have some fun. So
send me the link, brother.
I'll there. Kellyn's there, and I'll pay. I'll send you a Venmo for the price of a Subway sandwich if George Pickens gets picked at either 39 or 48. But Kell, appreciate you coming on, my guy. As always available. I sent him a text message. He's like, send me the link. I said, all right, let's go. He's always ready for some draft talk. This is this right here is 3 biggest days of his career, so he's got to be on top of it. But we'll see you tomorrow, brother. Bear down, and let's do it, man.
All right. I'll see you tomorrow.
Peace.
Bye.